Hi, boys and girls. Yesterday, you heard some of this book, Polar Lands. We learned about the polar lands, and I made a list of some of the facts that I remembered about the polar lands. Today, we're going to be learning more about the polar lands, but we're not going to read more in this book today, boys and girls. Today, we're going to read part of this book called Polar Regions. The word regions is another word for areas or land. Today, you're going to learn even more about the polar lands from this book. The Arctic. At the North Pole, there is no land, only the Arctic Ocean. This ocean is covered by a 10-foot, 3-meter thick layer of ice for much of the year. Land from northern countries circles around the edge of the Arctic Ocean. Some of this land forms part of the Arctic polar region. This means that plants and animals from these countries can be found in the Arctic. The diagram shows how the amount of ice at the Arctic changes. In winter, the ice covers most of the Arctic Ocean and spreads onto the land surrounding it. In summer, the ice shrinks to about half the size. In summer, some of the areas of the Arctic look like they might be full of life. Summer in the Arctic. The Arctic is slightly warmer than the Antarctic because of the warm sea and the air currents. In summer, plants can grow on the land around the edge of the Arctic. This is because of the top layer of Earth thaws. This means that there is food for animals. Antarctica. Unlike the Arctic, Antarctica is a huge area of land. It forms one of the world's continents. Most of the land is covered all year round by a huge sheet of ice. The ice is up to 14,764 feet, or 4,500 meters, thick in some places. Only the highest mountains stick out above the ice. Antarctica is surrounded by the very deep, cold Southern Ocean. In winter, the sea around the land freezes, forming an ice layer up to 6 feet, 2 meters thick. In summer, the ocean melts, but sometimes only the very edges of land are free of ice. The Antarctic is incredibly cold. The map shows how the winter sea ice in the Antarctic spreads out beyond the Antarctic Circle. Antarctic life. There is no proper soil in Antarctica, just tiny bits of gravel. Few types of plants can survive here. There are no plant-eating animals, apart from some of the tiny insects, and no hunting land animals, as there is nothing for them to hunt. Most animal life in the Antarctic is based in the sea. Some animals come onto the land for resting, breeding, and raising their young. Boys and girls, I want you to think about, what are some other interesting things you've learned so far about the polar lands from listening to this part of this book. Boys and girls, we're going to listen to part of one last book today. And this book is called Who Lives Here? Polar Animals, written by Deborah Hodge and illustrated by Pat Stevens. We're going to learn more about the polar lands by reading a chapter in this book. What is a polar region? A polar region is a very cold place. For most of the year, thick snow and ice cover the ground. Oceans freeze and fierce winds blow. The Arctic and Antarctic are polar regions. The Arctic is home to many amazing creatures. Like all polar animals, their bodies are built for living in the cold. Brr! Antarctica is the coldest place on Earth. Whales, seals, and seabirds are the only large animals that can live here. Some polar animals live on pack ice, large areas of sea ice floating in the ocean. Antarctic land is called tundra. Caribou and other animals gobble up plants that grow here in the short summer. Boys and girls, I want you to think about what are some interesting things that you learned about the polar lands from listening to this story. Now, boys and girls, you're going to go to the next video to watch me model doing some writing about facts that we learned about the polar lands.